But before we dive into the disturbing tales of the night, let me ask you, do you have the courage to stay until the end? Most viewers don't subscribe to the channel, perhaps out of oversight, or perhaps because after hearing these stories, they never slept the same way again. If you think you can handle it, click subscribe now. This happened in 2019 in the Mendocino National Forest, Northern California. At the time, I was dating Jared, who was a total outdoor guy, the type who knew how to start a fire with a stick and always had a gun nearby just in case. We decided to go on a weekend getaway away from the city, no cell service, just the two of us and nature. I thought it was a romantic idea. My mistake. The spot we chose was pretty far from the marked trails. You could get there with a good car, but you had to tackle some really rough roads. When we found a nice clearing near a creek, we set up the tent and left the car parked right there, almost touching the trail. The day went by normally. Hiking, a few beers, nothing strange. At night, we packed everything away neatly in the car, cooler, food box, flashlights, and locked it. I remember clearly, I put the keys in the inside pocket of my backpack, which I left leaning against the opposite side of the tent, away from the entrance. Jared slept on the entrance side, with his rifle next to him. A cautious guy. I thought it was an exaggeration, but okay. We woke up early in the morning, and that's when everything went downhill. We came out of the tent, and the campsite looked like it had been hit by a hurricane. The food box smashed open, food scattered everywhere, the cooler knocked on its side. The strangest thing, all the car doors were open, all of them, even the trunk and the stereo, smashed on the ground as if someone had ripped it out and thrown it. Jared immediately accused me. "Did you leave the car unlocked yesterday?" I said no, of course not. I remember locking it. I went straight to my backpack to get the keys and they weren't there. I found them later, thrown on the ground, right next to the driver's side door. We were silent for a while. It wasn't just the campsite, even the forest felt wrong. The trees seemed twisted, in a way I hadn't noticed the day before. Everything was too quiet. No birdsong, no wind. Jared didn't want to say anything more. We packed everything up quickly and got out of there. On the way back, near the main road, he broke the silence out of nowhere. "I had a bizarre dream last night. I waited for him to tell me, but he hesitated. Then he blurted out, 'I dreamed that someone came into the tent. I didn't see their face, just someone standing there next to me, holding something. I tried to get up, but I couldn't move my body, like I was trapped.' I tried to get him to talk more, but he got weird, silent, and then just said, 'Better not talk about this anymore, not even to anyone.' We never touched on the subject again, but sometimes I think about that scene. All the doors open, our things ransacked, the way the trees seemed different, and I wonder if it was just an animal or some thief. Why did the whole forest seem to change that morning? I know no one believes me when I talk about it, which is why I've kept quiet all this time. But I know something entered our campsite that night, something that wasn't supposed to be there. I've never gone camping again without waking up in the middle of the night, thinking there's someone standing next to the tent. I've worked as a childcare provider for years, and I always try to take the kids out for outdoor activities when I can. This story happened last summer in Ohio, in the Zaleski State Forest, and even now, when I remember it, my stomach churns. I was taking care of some friend's son, Dylan, 4 years old, full of energy, and one of those kids who never stops moving. I decided to take him on a short, safe trail in an area called Hope Furnace Trail. Usually there are a lot of people there, cyclists, families, everything is very peaceful. But that day, there was no one. It was strange right from the start. There had been some heavy rains a few days before, so some areas were a little damaged, but nothing that seemed dangerous. Still, the forest was too quiet. We continued to a clearing that I already knew, where there is an old stone furnace. Dylan was excited, running from one side to the other. I was relaxing until I noticed something strange. In the center of the clearing, right in the middle of the roots of a fallen tree, there was a piece of cloth. It looked like a dirty rag. It wasn't there before, I'm sure of it. Dylan even pointed. "Look, Auntie, a scarf." I smiled, but inside something tightened. You know that feeling that has no sound but the body understands? That clear impression that someone is watching you but you can't see? I started looking around discreetly. Nothing, no person, no noise. I decided it was time for us to go back. I didn't want to scare Dylan, so I told him it was a race back to the car. He loved the idea, started running, and I followed, trying to stay calm. Every branch breaking behind me sounded louder than it should. We arrived at the car. I locked the doors immediately, my heart beating too fast for what was, theoretically, a peaceful trail. But the worst came when we were leaving. Almost at the exit of the forest, there is a dirt road where few cars pass. It was there that I saw him, a man, standing by the side of the road, covered in mud, ragged clothes, unkempt beard. He looked to be in his early 30s, but his eyes were empty in a way that is difficult to describe, as if he wasn't exactly there. He didn't do anything. He just slowly turned his head and followed me with his eyes as I passed with the car. Fixed gaze, without expression, until he disappeared in the rearview mirror. For days that haunted me. I reviewed everything mentally, the empty trail, the rag in the middle of the path, the way it seemed like someone wanted us to see it. I don't know if he was watching us before or if it was coincidence, but I know I felt it clearly. The feeling of being watched started before I saw him. Dylan didn't even notice. He only remembers the fun race. I, on the other hand, have never been able to walk in that forest again without feeling that there are eyes in the woods, waiting for me to let my guard down. Several friends suggested that maybe it was just a homeless person or someone camping illegally. But tell me, why would someone leave a rag exactly in our path and make a point of being seen at the exit? My friend Nick and I have never told this story to many people because even today it seems like no one would believe it. But I know he remembers it the way I do because I saw it on his face at the time. He turned as pale as I did. This happened in 2014 in Allegheny National Forest, Pennsylvania. It was early October, right at the height of autumn, so we decided to hike and camp for a night. Nick knew the area well. He grew up nearby, so we didn't bother taking a map or anything. The day was great. The trail was beautiful, red and golden leaves everywhere. After lunch, we decided to go off the main path a bit, explore deeper, with no set time to return. That's when we found it. A clearing, very open, without much vegetation in the middle. And there in the center were 5 people. They seemed completely normal. Men and women, ordinary clothes, jeans, t-shirts. One guy was even wearing a hooded sweatshirt. They were in a circle, but they weren't doing anything weird. They were just talking, laughing quietly, but the way they were positioned seemed rehearsed. The clearing had nowhere to hide. They saw us as soon as we stepped in there, and that's when everything got strange. Nick raised his hand and said something like, "Hey, is everything all right there?" Nothing. No reaction, just staring at us. We tried again. "Sorry, we didn't mean to interrupt. Is everything okay?" Silence. It was at that moment that the weight on my chest appeared. They weren't doing anything openly threatening, but the way they looked at us, fixed, motionless, as if they were waiting for something. Nick looked at me and just said quietly, "Let's get out of here." We turned around and started back down the trail, without running, trying not to look nervous. But about 2 minutes later, I heard footsteps behind us. I glanced back. They were following us, all of them. The same distance, same blank face. I sped up. Nick noticed. We tried to strike up a conversation again. "Is everything okay? Are you lost?" Nothing, just that constant walking. That's when we ran. They ran too. They didn't shout, didn't say a word. They just kept the distance without stopping. Those were the longest 30 minutes of my life. When we finally saw the car, we practically jumped inside, sped away without even looking back. But it wasn't over. On the dirt road, going away, I looked in the rearview mirror and saw a car coming. It was an old SUV without a license plate, caked in mud. There was no way it could have come from anywhere else. It was a super isolated area. The car kept its distance, but every curve we made, it made too. For about 15 minutes it was like that, until we got out onto the main road. Nick turned around, accelerated to see if he could shake it off. Only when we entered the nearest town did we lose it from sight. We called the police, gave the report, but without a plate, without anything specific, they couldn't do much. And honestly, I think I preferred it that way. I didn't want anything more to do with that. Even today, I wonder what would have happened if we had stayed in the clearing for 5 more minutes, or if we had stopped on the road. The weirdest thing? None of them said a word, not a sound, just fixed gaze and synchronized steps. I never went back to that forest. And honestly, I prefer it that way. I don't know if anyone else has gone through something similar, but even today, I don't know how to explain what happened to me and my ex, Kate, that night. This was in 2016, somewhere in inland Oregon, near the Deschutes National Forest. Kate had planned a surprise, a camping night to disconnect and spend time together. I'm not even that into camping, but she was so excited that I went along with it. She found a remote location, off the more popular trails. We arrived there in the late afternoon, set up the tent near the car, made a simple dinner, drank some wine. Perfect atmosphere. Just us and the forest. When it got completely dark, we started hearing those typical sounds of the woods. Crickets, leaves rustling, nothing that was scary. Until, out of nowhere, everything stopped. And when I say everything, I mean everything. No sound, as if someone had pressed mute on the forest. That's when I felt that strange weight on my chest, you know, as if the air had gotten denser. Kate also noticed. She stood still, with that expression of someone trying to hear something beyond the silence. "Did you hear that?" she whispered. Before I could answer, something hit the side of the tent hard. It seemed big, heavy, like if someone had thrown a bag of sand against the canvas. My instinct was to grab the flashlight and go out, but Kate grabbed my arm, scared. I asked, "Is anyone there?" Nothing. Absolute silence. I mustered the courage and went out with the flashlight in front. I swept the whole field. No footprints, no animals, nothing stirred. But I swear, the feeling was as if someone was standing there, just out of the reach of the light. That was enough to convince us to quickly take everything down and go back to the car. We didn't talk much. We just acted as if we both knew we needed to get out of there now. We got in the car, doors locked, and started driving down the dirt road back to town. That's when it started. First I thought it was the engine, a creak like a metallic hum. But then the sound increased. It seemed to be coming from inside the car, as if something was vibrating on the dashboard or under the seats. Kate turned off the radio, but the noise continued. It was rhythmic, almost like a flapping of wings or someone drumming fast. "You're hearing that, right?" she asked, her voice trembling. I just shook my head, trying not to lose control of the steering wheel. The noise wasn't loud, but it was constant, insistent, impossible to ignore. The forest sped past the window, and I just thought about getting out of there as quickly as possible. The sound continued for about 10 minutes, always there, in the background, almost inside the ear, until without warning, it simply stopped, from one second to the next. As if it had been turned off, the silence that came after wasn't relief, it was worse. When we finally arrived in a small town and parked at a gas station, I looked at Kate. She didn't want to talk about it. She just wanted to leave. The next day, we went back to get what we left behind. The things were there in the same way, just one or another object turned over on the ground. No sign of animal, person, nothing. But even today, what torments me wasn't the noise outside. It was what followed us into the car. I've reviewed everything 1,000 times. The car had no mechanical problems. I checked, took it to a mechanic afterwards. I never heard that sound anywhere else again. I'm not the type to easily believe in supernatural things. I've always been more skeptical, down to earth. But what happened to me and my wife Lisa that night doesn't fit into anything I can explain. This was about 3 years ago in inland New Mexico. Lisa's family has huge tracts of land there, kind of in the middle of nowhere. An old farm surrounded by miles of desert and some low mountains in the background. They let us camp there since no one was using the property at that time. It was supposed to be a quiet trip, just us, no cell phones, no city noise. We set up camp in the late afternoon in a higher area that gave us a view of almost the entire valley. We prepared dinner, enjoyed the sunset, that giant silence that only exists in isolated places. That's when I saw the light for the first time. I thought it was a reflection of some vehicle far away, but it didn't make sense. There was no road in that direction. It was a yellowish-orange light, stationary, low, kind of dim. I thought it was some farmer on another property, so I ignored it. But it didn't disappear. As it got darker, the light seemed to get closer, not fast, but constant. Lisa noticed too. "Do you see that?" I agreed. We started paying more attention. When we used the flashlight to illuminate something, the light seemed to move at the same pace, as if imitating. I thought it was a coincidence, until we turned off the flashlight, and the light stopped. It was becoming increasingly clear that it was watching us. When we moved, it moved too. When we stopped, it stood still. No sound, no shape beyond the constant glow. Part of me wanted to rationalize. Maybe someone with a drone, maybe some agricultural equipment, but nothing matched. There were no structures nearby, just empty land and silence. Then, without warning, the light began to advance. It was coming straight towards us, not slowly anymore, as if it had waited for the right moment. That feeling of being watched turned into something worse, as if, suddenly, there was intention. We shouted at each other to gather our things, but we abandoned half of the equipment. We ran to the car, and I started driving down the dirt road, looking in the rearview mirror all the time. And the light kept coming. Not from above, but close to the ground, as if it was gliding behind us. I accelerated, but it seemed to keep its distance, always visible. Only when we reached an elevation and crossed over to another part of the farm did I lose sight of it. We still stopped, breathless, at the top, waiting to see if it would appear again. We didn't see anything else that night, just total darkness. The next day, we returned to the camping area. There were no marks on the ground, no footprints, no trails, nothing. Lisa asked me several times if I thought it was just a neighboring farmer or maybe a distant truck. But the truth is that light knew exactly where we were, and it copied every movement until it decided it was time to come after us. I never went back to that piece of land, nor do I intend to. I researched strange lights in New Mexico. I only found some old cases of the so-called Marfa lights, but they don't explain what we experienced. That was not natural. This happened to me and my friend Carter in 2020 in the Ouachita National Forest region in Arkansas. We've both always been fans of long trails, and that summer we decided to hike part of the Ouachita Trail, which is much less busy than places like the Appalachians. Everything was quiet until the third night. It was late afternoon when we saw the guy for the first time. He was standing near a fork in the trail, carrying a very old backpack like those from the 80s, with torn straps. He didn't have a tent, sleeping bag, or anything tied to it, just a hatchet attached to the side. Carter, as always, was polite. Hunting or just hiking? The guy took a long time to answer. He seemed confused. Ah, hiking. Hunting too sometimes, he said, avoiding looking us in the eye. We tried to make small talk, asking which section he was doing, if he had seen other groups. He only answered with short phrases like, around, alone. The feeling was strange. I can't explain it. He didn't seem dirty enough to be on the trail for days, or properly equipped, but he had that look, empty, as if he was trying to remember how to act normally. After an uncomfortable time, he said he needed to keep going and disappeared into the forest without even saying goodbye. Carter was restless. Me too. We advanced a few more kilometers and set up our camp in a well-known rest area, already very dark. We made dinner, tried to forget about the guy. Around 2 a.m., I wake up to a strange noise, like someone was messing with the backpacks, dragging things. I sat up in the sleeping bag, held my flashlight tight, and whispered to Carter. He was already awake, looking in the same direction. I point the flashlight, and I see someone crouched down by our backpacks, rummaging through them. When the light hits, he slowly stands up, as if he's not in a hurry. It's the same guy. He looks at us for a second, then simply disappears into the woods, without running, without a word. We stayed awake until dawn, every sound of a branch breaking making us tense. When it dawned, we saw that he took some protein bars, a canteen, but left more valuable things, as if he only needed the basics to keep walking. We went back to town soon after, telling what happened to the local forest ranger. That's when my stomach sank. We showed a basic description of the guy, and the ranger already seemed uncomfortable. He said there was a warning from weeks ago of a man wanted for theft and assault in nearby areas who was hiding in forests. Coincidence? Maybe. But the way he messed with our things, so calm, without hurry, as if he knew he could come and go without being stopped. I never went back to that trail, and even today, every time I hear footsteps at night in camp, I think of that empty look. Before anyone asks, yes, we fastened our backpacks well afterwards. He would have had to cut or untie them, but he didn't seem to care. He wanted to come and go as if he was part of the place. This happened to me and 3 friends in 2018 during a fishing trip in inland Montana, near the Beaverhead Deer Lodge National Forest. It's a beautiful region, full of secluded lakes that you can only access by 4x4 truck and rough trails. Perfect for those who want peace, cold beer, and trout on the hook. We arrived at a small, practically untouched lake. No one in sight. We set up camp about 100 meters away from the main trail, made a small campfire, and spent the day fishing. The night arrived peacefully. We were relaxing, chatting, when out of nowhere, a strong flashlight illuminates our faces. We froze. We didn't hear anyone approaching. No footsteps, no sound of breaking branches. Then a voice said, "Good evening, gentlemen. Local police department. Just passing through to check." The guy was about 10 meters away, tall, thin, wearing a heavy jacket and jeans. No visible uniform, no badge. One of my friends, Tom, asked right away, "Are you a police officer here in town? Which department?" The man ignored the question. He just kept illuminating us with the flashlight, his face difficult to see because of the strong light. "Is everything all right here?" he repeated, his voice neutral, without intonation. The atmosphere became tense. We replied that everything was fine, just fishing, and he didn't say anything else. He turned slowly and simply disappeared into the darkness without explanation. No sound of a car, nothing. We stood there, paralyzed, exchanging glances. "That was freaking weird, right?" someone murmured. I got up, took my most powerful flashlight, and tried to follow in the direction he went. But when I got to the trail, there was no sign of anyone. It was impossible for someone to have disappeared so quickly in that terrain without making noise, and no cars or ATVs were nearby. The worst thing was realizing he knew exactly where we were, without us having seen or heard him arriving. No one slept well the rest of the night. Every crack in the woods seemed like a warning. When we returned to town 2 days later, we went to the local department to ask if anyone was patrolling that area. Answer, no one. The police don't usually patrol those trails, except in searches or emergencies. There was no patrol that weekend. We never understood who that man was, or what he really wanted. But I know one thing, he had no interest in protecting anyone there. We've been asked why we didn't report it formally. Honestly, the local police didn't even have anyone to check, and the lack of information made us even more nervous. How do you report someone who seemed to evaporate into the forest?